Welcome to another broadcast from MindYourHealthcast.com. Well, as you probably recall, if you watched the last video, we were talking about the war on cancer. I say that in a funny way because as I've studied the subject and what has happened over the years, I have become aware of the fact that maybe it was not a genuine effort at all, but something to make it look like something is either being or going to be done for the increase in cancer and the costs, of course, associated with that. And I know presidents, and I can't question his motives, but which was President Nixon, as you well know. Remember, I showed you the big headlines back in 1971. Nixon declares war on cancer, signs $1.6 billion cancer bill, names man to head fight. Of course, I always laugh every time I hear people talking about fighting a disease and battling it and lost their battle, and we've got to fight. I don't know what it is they're fighting. I sometimes am reminded of Don Quixote and his attacks on windmills, that we hold up something and look like it has an independent existence, like cancer, and then we're going to fight that. But it's not that simple, and that's not the way it really is at all. It's not a disease that overtakes you. It's a malfunction because of a series of issues that occurs in your system, and it's your own cells that go haywire because of contamination and weakness and a series of things. And so it's not that simple, and so it's not like here's this big monster called cancer and it's attacking us, and therefore we have to fight a battle against the cancer. That's not the way it works at all. And I'm always laughing because I hear all of these news articles and commentators who are saying, well, so-and-so lost their battle with cancer. You're not battling cancer. You are in need of correcting your body. And as long as you think that cancer is something out there that exists apart from you but can attack you, then I suppose you could see it as a battle. However, that's not, as I say, the way it works. When you really study the mechanism of what's going on from all the different research that's been done over and over and over and for years and years and years, going way back, it really is an issue that we have to make changes in our lifestyle, in our intoxication of our environment, in our stress level, in our emotional state, and a lot of other things if we're going to deal with the problem. And it's not something that we have to fight. But nonetheless, he called it a war on cancer. So the question is, okay, this was 1971. We started this big campaign to get rid of cancer, and the question is, have we succeeded? Well, I'm just looking, I've done some research back at some of the studies that have been done, and I've looked at several. Here's one that goes back to 2005 by the World Health Organization. And it's called Facts and Figures, Causes of Cancer, Prevention, Early Detection, Cure, and Care Contacts. I will scratch the cure. The care, yeah, and at what price? Now, what they're saying is basically statistics are people with the tears wiped away. A professor made that comment years ago. I'm not so sure what it is that they're trying to prove of that. Anyhow, and they're saying, this was published in 2005, and they're saying that in 2002, the global action against cancer, well, in 2002, 6.7 million deaths, 10.9 million new cases, 24.6 million people living with cancer, meaning they have been diagnosed, but they haven't been treated to death yet. And so here's 24 million of those. Now, with all that's been going on, and you know, when I say all that's going on, we've spent billions and billions. Some people estimate since 1971 as high as $300 billion in research on cancer. And the interesting thing to me is, and I have to throw this in at this point, that I have seen that the medical industry, and I call it an industry because that's what it's become, is big business. I've watched it from the time I was a small boy evolve into what it is today, into a giant monster consuming now trillions of dollars, and people sicker than ever. And it's quite interesting. In fact, you know, the justification is, well, yeah, we spent all this money, but well, look what's happened where people are living longer. And I don't have time to get into it in detail, but I happened to pick up a group of studies, and one of them was that basically to say that we're living longer and healthier is a lie. In fact, I've known that for a long time, but I just thought it was somebody else had run into the same thing. We're not really dealing with that today, but just to make the mention, the medical industry business has a tremendous PR machine and a tremendous marketing machine. And they're very good at what they do, which is selling medications. Whether the medications actually improve people's health is another story, but they're good at selling those. And so, anyhow, here we are in 2002, all this going on. And so, again, this comes from WHO, World Health Organization. In the year 2002, cancer killed more than 631 million in North America and 479 million in South America, Central America, and the Caribbean. And of course they're saying, well, cancer knows no borders. Now in the year 2002, which means it's everywhere in the world, year 2002, 10.9 million new cases around the world. And are things improving? Well, no, not really. Now they're saying by the year of 2020, based on the trends, North America be having almost 1 million deaths per year, and Central, South, and the Caribbean 633 million. So the trends are that it's getting worse. The number of new cases each year would rise also from the 10.9 million, they're saying, because of the way the trends are going. So what they're saying is, what will the future picture be if we act now? And of course they're saying that if people just quit smoking and so forth, everything would be great, which is not true. You know, I'm not in favor of people smoking cigarettes. I don't think it's good. My mother, just last year, died at 94. She smoked every day, with a few very short breaks, I remember when I was young, of her and my dad quitting for a short time, then going back to smoking. She just died at 94, and she did not have lung cancer. And most of that time she smoked 1 to 2 packages a day, and for years it was Camel's, one of the strongest unfiltered products on the market, and she didn't develop cancer. Now, I'm not saying it's good, and I'm not saying it can't be a contributing factor, but I think that that's a simplistic answer to a complex problem. I don't know how many people I've known of who died of lung cancer that never smoked in their life, nor were they even around the families that smoked. But medicine, in order to maintain, once they came up with this idea that smoking was an issue, I remember back years ago when the AMA was questioned by the press about smoking, well, do you think there's any problem with smoking? And they said, well, no, not really. In fact, in some cases where people are under high stress conditions, it's probably a benefit. Now, that was their position for years, and then suddenly they took this flip. And now all of a sudden, of course, there's a hole in it because all these people who never smoked and really never spent a lot of time around smokers come down with lung cancer. And so then they had to say, well, it was secondhand smoke. And I mean, I'm pretty gullible in certain things, but it's stretching it like way beyond the breaking point to say that just having a little smell of secondhand smoke is going to provoke lung cancer. But it's I guess become a characteristic in our society that everything that comes along, we want a fast Band-Aid on it, a simple answer to it, so we can just wipe it aside and keep on going and not have to deal with it. I think it's a way of putting it aside and not wrestling with the real issues and the real problem and the complexities. Because, as I say, cancer is a complex issue. It's not a single cause issue, and it's not even a single issue, period, because all these different, quote, cancers are different in nature, but they kind of group the whole group of them together. It depends on the tissue in the body. It depends on some of the causative factors. It depends on emotional state. It depends on your immune system. I mean, it just goes on and on. And so it's not that simple. But we like to think if we'd either put a bunch of money in something or we just say, okay, this is the cause. Lung cancer is caused by smoking. Let's just get everybody to quit smoking. It's not doing the job because there's other pollutants in the air that can be a problem, and there's a lot of emotional issues, and there is a lot of things going on that are way beyond our discussion today that lead to these various types of issues that we call cancer. Now, anyhow, the question that I asked originally is, really, are we winning the war on cancer? Now, here I read to you from actually it's a booklet that was put out by WHO back in 2005, and the outlook wasn't good, but they claimed if we got people quit smoking and some other issues that we like to say that this is the cause, then they said if we don't do this stuff, then it's going to get worse and worse and worse. Now, I pulled up something from December 12, 2013, so this is pretty new stuff. World Health Organization sees cancer risk rising around the world. The research agency also projected that cancer will surge around the world by 2025 with 19.3 million new cases diagnosed annually by the comparison of 2012 numbers of 14.1 million. By 2025, the number of people expected to die annually from cancer is expected to increase to 11.4 million from the 2012 figure of 8.2. And that's almost a 50% increase, maybe 40%. So their outlook, several years after 2005, as you can imagine, 8 years later, are saying that it's going up like crazy. In my mind, it's going to continue because we're not addressing the real problems, and the money is just going to figure out ways to develop more expensive drugs to make more money in the management of cancer, not cure, but the management of cancer, because we have an industry. And an industry, once it gets developed, a couple things happen. One is that it's going to watch that nobody interferes with the industry, and therefore a lot of the advertising is going to offer promises that never materialize. I've watched over the years, and it seemed that every year before there was a big cancer campaign, there would be some news leaks come out of a promising new therapy. And yeah, it looks really good. And I know I remember seeing one that talked about liver cancer. And this was in the news, and it again was right around the time they were going to start their drive for more money for the fight on cancer, or war on cancer, after 40-some years. Anyhow, it's interesting to look at it, because here they're saying, here's something that's really showing some promise. So then when I read the details, here's the promise. If they took this drug, a person with liver cancer could live 30 years longer, 30 days longer, 1 month, which statistically would, when you got into it, would probably amount to nothing. And really spending thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to be treated by a new drug that might give you another month. I mean, I don't even know how they could determine to a month how long somebody lives. But every year, I remember interferon, when it was being waved out as the magic. Oh, interferon shows great promise, great promise. Give us your money, give us your money. And so we watch this every year, and it's become such an industry. There's even people who set up foundations to go out and collect money. And of course, everybody in the foundation draws mammoth salaries, and some of it does get put into a little into research and a little into some of these other things. But if they say taking $300 million in a year, and a few million get out to actually doing any research. And what is the research? The research is based on looking for new drugs and new surgical procedures and new radiation procedures, which have proven all of these years not to be effective. There is no magic drug, because cancer is not a bug that you can stomp on, and if you get the right hammer to stomp on the bug, you solve the problem. It's not that type of issue. And so everybody still kind of sees it as something that grabs or attacks or takes over. And that's not what it is. And so here's another article I just picked up. And this is back a little piece. And again, it's based on some WHO. It says, are the number of cancer cases increasing or decreasing in the world? And of course, the answer is it's the leading cause of death worldwide, and the number of cases globally is increasing. So they go back to the same thing. And again, this was based on material from the World Health Organization. Here's another one on the war on cancer. And I remember back when Nixon signed the bill, everybody was all excited. Boy, we're going to solve this problem. The government's behind it. And they're going to put money in it, and we're going to have it solved. And of course, as I mentioned last week, the prediction was that by 1976, that was 5 years after the bill was signed, that the multi-million-dollar research program would actually get rid of cancer. They predicted a cure by 1976, 5 years after the bill. And of course, instead, 40-some years later, and billions of dollars spent, are we any better off? And the answer is no. There's actually more people now with cancer than ever. Something isn't right. And I think this person kind of hit it on the head. It's called the never-ending war on cancer. And basically, that's what it is. You would think someone, or at some point, would ask why so much money has been allocated to cancer research over the years, with so little impact on cancer mortality. After almost a century, cancer is still the #2 cause of death in the U.S. Why? Cancer research is important and should, of course, go on, but let's not kid ourselves that it's been cost effective, because by almost any definition, it hasn't been. Since President Nixon declared war on cancer in 1971, we've dumped $500 billion into the conflict, and the cancer death rate has hardly budged. Now, of course, he recognizes I use the cancer as though it's one disease, but it is dis-ease in the sense that you're not at ease when you have it, but whether or not that is the real problem or not, that it's a disease, that an entity, and I think, as I say, until we get away from this idea that we're dealing with some entity that is attacking us and we have to fight it and go to battle and all of that, I think that in itself represents a problem. Now, there's a good book you might want to get. It was written just a few years ago, in the 2000s. I think the last printing that I have showing here was 2003, and it's probably more. I mean, they may have reprinted again. And it's called Politics and Healing by Daniel Haley, The Suppression and Manipulation of American Medicine. Now, Joey Whitaker, some have probably maybe heard of him, did the introduction to it. And anyhow, the problem is, here's what the guy in the foreword has mentioned. This is another person, this isn't Whitaker, this is in the foreword. It's been my good fortune to get to read the manuscript of a book written by former legislator Dan Haley documenting a serious problem that exists in our society. It points out documented facts that clearly illustrate the suppression of new medical treatments if these treatments come from other than conventional sources. It is extremely important that the facts in this book be made available to the public. It points out how innovation in medicine is suppressed in our society by current laws, regulations, and policies, and what has happened as a result. And the person who's making or writing this forward says, I served for 12 years in the United States Congress. I found most members truly dedicated to trying to do the right thing. Unfortunately, too frequently did not have sufficient facts to be able to make the right decisions. Few members of Congress are aware of the problems which the facts in this book clearly point out. Bottom line is, he's saying is that the politics control it. First of all, research is controlled by, I mean, we get all these donations, supposedly, and as I say, the organizations that solicit the donations many times eat up a good share of the money for their own operating costs and their own salaries, many times $500,000 a year salaries, to people to be head of this group to go out and collect money and and PR it so it looks like a lot is being done. But apart from that, there is research money becomes available, but unfortunately much of it is from the drug industry, who stands to benefit from it. Therefore, the only research they're going to fund is research on products that they might be able to patent and sell and make a huge profit on. So that means that true research for the sake of someone getting well is really hard to come by. This book has a little sub-comment on the front of it. It says, what's wrong with American healthcare? Why is one American dying of cancer every minute? What is the solution? So they get into the fact also that because of the politics, they're able to control keeping out any kind of therapy otherwise that might reduce the amount of radiation or the amount of drugs or the amount of surgery that is being done with cancer, so that the industry will not suffer. Now, I have been watching the cost, and the last time I did some tallying, it seems to me that the average cancer patient, from the time they are diagnosed until the time they are treated to death, is about $1 million average. So if you multiply that times the number of cancer cases, you see what kind of money we're talking about. So that means every patient that's lost from the traditional medical approach represents $1 million loss. So if they get somebody who pulls away several thousand people, they could hit $1 billion loss pretty fast. So you can see what a problem that would be, and especially if the new treatment is simple and not very expensive comparative-wise. And see, this goes on not only with cancer, but other issues too, especially if they're big industries. Now, if you want to do yourself a tremendous favor, just go back and study the history of the conflicts in medicine. The big fight over the cancer industry, the big fight over the AIDS industry, the big fight over the blood supply, and who was going to be able to make the money on it. And it just goes on and on and on. And so you'll see that big business and politics, which can be bought with big business and big money, have controlled the industry. So, I mean, I know I have stacks, actually, of material of different people who have come along that either came up with electronic approaches that did not even require drugs, and therefore the treatment was nothing. How those were carefully disposed of, and the person who came up with the information was dealt with either by death or imprisonment or banishment. Now, this has happened over and over and over. And this book, Politics and Healing, will kind of give you an introduction to it. It doesn't cover the whole thing by a long way. But I don't even have time to go into all the different people. The Coley vaccine, for example. Here was a doctor from Harvard back in the early 1900s who suddenly got the realization that if a person was provoked into an inflammation, that cancers, especially sarcomas, would just shrink up and disappear in the process. And so he developed something which ended up being called Coley's vaccine, or Coley's toxins. C-O-L-E-Y was his name, Dr. Coley. And he figured out a way, after he saw what would happen, because he watched in a few cases where he had a patient with an aggressive sarcoma, and sarcomas traditionally are very aggressive. It's a connective tissue type cancer. And he had a patient who, and he was a surgeon who actually dealt with that. That's how it came him to be around all these. And he had a patient who had this aggressive sarcoma, and they got an inflammation in their arm, and their fever went up and all that. Well, in the process, he noticed that the sarcoma suddenly stopped growing and started to shrink up and disappear. And he said, wow, what's going on? And so he observed it a few other times, and finally he said, it appears that if you can provoke the body into going into a reactive mode, an inflammatory mode, that it can take care of a cancer. And so that's what he did, and it was coming along very well, and there was a lot written about it. Now, I have actually an article from the American Cancer Society. They talk about it, but they kind of push it off to the side. Well, Coley was one of the early people that understood something about the immune system and all of that, but of course we progressed way beyond him, blah, blah, blah. But here's a guy who's getting rid of a cancer just by giving you an injection that provokes an inflammation, and it's gone. Now, this treatment is still used around the world, but not in this country, because eventually there were a group of doctors who felt that radiation was the way you should treat cancer. And so here's Coley with a very inexpensive little injection, getting rid of a tumor, and here they're sitting with all this big expensive radiation equipment, the X-ray, that was going to bring in huge piles of money for all these radiation treatments. And here he's talking about a $5 treatment or a $10 treatment that could help get rid of the cancer. You know, that's not good if you've got an industry that's dependent on a lot of money flowing in. Then you don't want something like Dr. Coley. So anyhow, they couldn't poo-poo it because he did get results. So what they did is they kind of put him off to the side and say, well, you know, he did this early study in immunization, but now we've progressed way beyond it. And then, of course, there's a bunch of things you can get from the American Cancer Society, comprehending alternative methods for cancer management. And so they go on into talking about mainstream medicine and some of these comprehending alternative things. And again, it's kind of downplayed that it's nothing tremendous. And then they get into the quackery and fraud, and somebody might die if they did some treatment other than the real treatment. And of course, if you do the real treatment, about 99% of the people are going to die. I mean, we don't even have time to get into all the numbers, the real numbers. But, you know, we get back to this thing that if you live beyond 5 years after you're diagnosed with cancer, it is now considered a cure. Now, if at 5 years and 1 day they discover that you're full of cancer, but they hadn't caught it yet, you still were a cure. Now, that's how statistics can be manipulated. So the 5-year survival rate is totally worthless. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't get there anyhow. A very small percentage even reach this point. But what's happening now is they're trying to find it earlier, so they have a longer period to treat it, so therefore a lot more people go beyond 5 years before they die, but they still end up dying of the cancer. Now, I have a book written by a doctor whose friend developed cancer. He went with him to the oncologist, and the oncologist was blowing off about how the 5-year survival rate has improved, and so this doctor decides to look into everything. So as he looks into it, he finds out, well, yeah, because they're diagnosing it earlier, therefore people tend to live a little bit longer before they die. But then when he looked at the death rate is still the same. So they're going to die anyhow. It's just from the time they know they have cancer, they're just going to live a little longer, that's all. But they would have anyhow. It didn't change anything. The only thing that changed is that probably had they not been treated, because there have been some studies that show if they did nothing, they probably lived 2 to 3 times longer with less misery than they did when they went through the treatment. Because the modern medical treatment for cancer is not very pleasant, and it's not much of a lifestyle. So there's a lot of other things. There was another doctor by the name of Dr. Koch, K-O-C-H, that came up with something, and it was very simple, an injection of a catalyst that caused the cells to start throwing poisons out, and people with cancer would get better. They drummed him ultimately out of the country. They lied about him. They made false charges against him until he finally went other places, and it's used around the world. When I was on my German study trip, we studied with a doctor who was part of a whole group of doctors that used the Koch therapy. But in this country, of course, he was no good. It was a fraud. You know, go back to your real cancer therapy. And what they're really meaning is, hey, every time you go off someplace, we're going to lose $1 million. Let's keep all these people here. And the oncologist is a role pretty aggressive, because I've met some patients that said that the oncologist kept calling them, you've got to get in here and you've got to do this. You've got to do this radiation or this chemotherapy, blah, blah, blah. Homeopathy, the American Cancer Society poo-poos that. No studies, they say. I was able to bring up several studies, and I have copies of them, and at least 2 or 3 of the studies were done at MD Anderson in Austin, Texas, and were published in the International Journal of Oncology. But I dare say, if you go there, you're not going to get that therapy. But there's a doctor from India by the name of Banerjee. He's presented before the American Cancer Institute in the USA. I have a copy of the cases he presented that showed that with a few dollars worth of 2 homeopathics, people got better in one of the studies. And again, I have a copy of this. This is not hearsay. I have a copy of the actual journal article from the International Journal of Oncology from MD Anderson. They had a group of people with brain tumors. Dr. Banerjee had 2 homeopathics that the actual cost for the whole treatment, I'm guessing, would have been between $50 and $100. Of those cancers, there were 7 cases. They all, without exception, if I recall, received some improvement at the time the paper was written. Now, that doesn't mean later they did not go further, but in most cases the cancer stopped, slowed down, or disappeared. Within that brain tumor group, 7 of the patients had glioblastomas, which is a common type of brain tumor. There were 7 in the study, and with his treatment amounting to literally pennies, 6 of the 7 had a total remission of the tumor. You'd show me where any modern medical treatment using modern expensive treatments amounting to about $1 million have actually gotten rid of, had it disappear without surgery, without chemotherapy, without radiation, have the tumor disappear for pittance of cost. You show me those cases where even 1 or 2 have a total remission. Here we have 6 out of 7. And would you not think that this been in just recent years that this occurred? And again, I actually have, like the one before the National Cancer Institute, this is a copy of the research paper that was written in Oncology Reports. The other was published in the Journal of Oncology. You would have thought that would have made national news. 6 out of 7 brain tumors totally disappear over a short period of time with 2 homeopathic remedies that really cost pennies. You would think, wow, this is great news. Don't even hear about it. Why? Because what news agency of any national network who the bulk of their money now is coming from drug advertisements are going to do anything to upset their advertisers? They're not going to run it. It's not going to. You're going to see it, but it's there. It's out there. I mean, you know, the research center can say, well, yeah, we did the study and we published it and we wrote, about it, but there's no interest. They did another study at the same place. And again, I have the actual research copy from the Journal of International Journal of Oncology. They did a study on breast cancer cells of 4 homeopathic remedies versus chemotherapy. Chemotherapy, of course, extremely toxic. The homeopathics had equal to or better results in causing the cancer cells to die off, not by poisoning them, but causing them to die off in something called apoptosis, which is self-destruct, without poisoning them. And the interesting thing is that the study said no adverse effects. So here's a very cheap, and I'm sure the chemotherapy, if you were to get it, would be $2,000 or $3,000 per treatment. And here again, we're talking about per treatment, probably 20 cents to 50 cents per treatment. I mean, it's just, I'm saying this to say, you might want to start waking up and you might want to start demanding that more information get out that's out there. There's nobody looking for it because they don't even believe it can exist. Yeah, here's the American Cancer Society off of their official site, who says, overview, it's talking about homeopathy. And here's what they say. While homeopathy appears to be safe, appears, available published studies do not show that homeopathic remedies are effective in treating cancer. A blatant lie. A blatant lie. How can you be the American Cancer Society and supposedly up on everything and not know that a study was done at a major cancer treatment center in the country associated with a state university and not be aware of a study that was published showing that it's not, that there has been effect? But here that's what they're saying. Available published studies. That's not true. I have them. Do not show that homeopathic remedies are effective in healing cancer. Well, it doesn't. It normalizes the body. Homeopathics normalize, and so therefore the body got rid of it. The cancer cells died off because the body shut them off. Okay, I said it might be of some help with the side effects of real cancer treatment, but other studies show little or no effect even for that. So, it says, however, some supporters believe the homeopathic can be used to treat and cure cancer. Some practitioners claim homeopathy can help cancer patients by reducing pain and improving vitality and well-being, stopping the spread of cancer, and strengthening the immune system. Some claim it can lessen certain symptoms and side effects from radiation therapy, chemotherapy, and hormone therapy, such as infections, nausea, vomiting, mouth sores, hot flashes, hair loss, depression, weakness, and ascites. That's what you get when you get the cancer treatment that medicine offers. And which, you know, ascites, of course, is the body filling up with fluid. So they're saying this is what the proponents say that could be of help. But then when they're all done, their bottom line is, now here they kind of contradict themselves a little bit. They say there is no reliable evidence showing that homeopathic remedies can treat cancer in humans. That's what they're saying. Some small clinical studies have hinted that homeopathic solutions may have some benefit in reducing certain side effects of the treatment of cancer. But the number of patients in the studies that reported benefits is typically small. The studies are not rigorously controlled, and few of them have been done. And a 2008 review of published studies concluded that analysis of published literature on homeopathy found insufficient evidence to support clinical efficacy of homeopathic therapy in cancer care. Now that's not true because these studies, some of those were before 2006, so either they were blind when they did the review or they're lying. Then, of course, they have the caveats. Are there any possible problems or complications? Oh, with these homeopathics, you never know what they might do, even though they're over-the-counter stuff, and even though they're not toxic in the doses that they're given. We got to be careful about those. Now, chemotherapy could kill you with the first dose, but don't pay attention to that. I get back to don't look at the old man behind the curtain. Ignore him. Relying on this type of treatment alone and avoiding or delaying conventional medical care for cancer may have serious health consequences. That's the caveat. So you don't want to take that stuff. You want to get the real thing. I mean, if you want to be poisoned, don't be poisoned maybe by a homeopathic. Be definitely poisoned by chemotherapy. Yeah, that makes good sense to me. I think I want to keep that in my note list if I ever am in need of something like that, which I hope I'm not. I've made it 76 years without it, and I'm thinking maybe I could probably make it a little bit longer. Okay, we've run out of time, but I hope I have awakened you a little bit. Do your own searching. Don't rely on me. You go out and do the searches. It's there. I pulled it from the internet searches, the same as you can. I had heard about it, but of course you never found the name of the news. So I said, okay, I'm going to start digging. And I started digging, and there's more I could tell you, but there's just not enough time. Other than the fact it's interesting, I just pulled up a bunch of stuff called Death by Medicine. This is by a Health Foundation, a definitive review and close reading of medical peer-reviewed journals and government health statistics shows that American medicine is frequently causes more harm than good, and then they talk about 2.2 million are have adverse effects anywhere from severe sickness and death. And there's several others. This is an MD who has written a book called Empower Yourself, Death by Modern Medicine is a book she wrote because she has gotten into all this stuff and found out what's really going on. So as I say, we didn't even have time to touch the surface. If you look back through the archives on my broadcast, there are some on cancer where we go into heavy detail of all the different things that have been out there that have been suppressed. In fact, I know of one case where a young man was making an herbal combination that he sold for people. He wasn't treating people per se, but he sold it and made it available because other people had shown that it was very effective in a lot of things related to cancer. Well, the FDA jumped all over him, and before it was done, they put him in federal prison, and he ended up dying, a fairly young man, out of the whole thing because he was making available an herb that people wanted to buy that they were doing for themselves, actually. So I know the whole story. I've studied it. I have books and volumes actually on it, and I keep up with as much as I can everything that's happening. So I'm hoping I provoked you enough to start looking for yourself. As I say, don't take my word. I pulled it from the internet. You can too. The research is out there. It shows that, as I say, either the researcher for the American Cancer Society is pretty dumb and blind, or they're deliberately lying that there is no research, because there is. It was nice being with you again, and we'll be talking more about some of the things that are going on, and probably some updates on homeopathy, some, people who are astute and clinicians and are working to help people get really well. They're very innovative sometimes, and there's some new ideas that have come up from around the world on homeopathy that puts it like way out in front. In fact, one of them involved this brain tumor case I was talking about and here in Texas. It was done by MD Anderson. Until the next time, go to our broadcast, mindyourhealthcast.com, and peruse through the pages. There's a lot of information and pretty much all the books, and I'm pretty sure this Politics and Healing is there by Haley, Daniel Haley. And it's a pretty good introduction to get you thinking about how it's all controlled. Remember that Benjamin Rush, way back, when he signed the Declaration of Independence, warned about the medical profession and how they could become tyrants if allowed to, which they have. I could tell you story after story that I personally know, and I could allude to others that you can find out for yourself. But the bottom line is they took control of medicine, or have tried to. They tried to keep everyone out and did it pretty successfully for a long time, but now people are demanding more, and bit by bit there's been some inroads, but it's still a long way. There's pet things like cancer, stay away from it. Where there's big foundations and there's all this stuff involved, the industry all is benefiting, and they don't want anybody coming along that's going to rock the boat or interfere or reduce their ability to attract money. It was nice being with you again. Until the next broadcast, be healthy.